So, hi everyone. Today I'm joined by Dr. Nathan Wangusi. He's gonna give us an introduction of himself, but I'm so delighted and honored that you agreed to be on the podcast today. I can't wait to dig in more into your story. And so, Nathan, please give the audience a little bit of an introduction about who you are.
Thank you, Rose, for having me on Shaping Africa today. My name is Dr. Nathan Wangusi. I am a candidate for the parliamentary seat for Langata. I'm also an engineer, I'm a scientist, I'm an author, and I have decided at some point in the last 1 year to use my experiences globally, as well as the deep conviction and love I have for the people of Langata to put my candidature forward for the seat of MP. I originally have grown up, born, raised in Langata, so it makes me a very unique candidate. It's the first time in recent history, in fact, in the last 30 years, that a native of Langata has been fronted for the parliamentary seat. It has been and is always the case that it's a seat that has been given to external parties. So this candidature presents a very unique opportunity for the people of Langata to be represented by one of their own, who understands, sympathizes, and can relate very specifically with the people of Langata. I have a background in engineering. I graduated from the University of Florida with a PhD in 2013. My specialty is in water resources engineering. Previous to that, I worked in engineering firms globally, in the US primarily. I did consulting work for some engineering firms in Kenya, in South Africa. And I think those experiences, particularly given that we are not only a water-stressed constituency, Langata is a very interesting constituency with respect to its water problems, because we're one of the older constituencies or that has a very well established water distribution system. So many of the estates were in the past connected to our distribution system in the city. We also host a deteriorated dam, which was supposed to be a source of water. At the same time, we have a very diverse set of different types of socioeconomic groups as well as settlements. And the mode of delivery for water in those settlements is obviously going to be very different. But the fact is, in all the different wards in the constituency and in the different types of settlements, there's the rate of development, the pace at which infrastructure is being put versus the pace at which human settlements are growing, has had a differential. So every community in Langata, including the high-income groups, as well as the low-income groups and everything in between, is water stressed. So my first mandate as the Member of Parliament will be to deal with that issue very conclusively. And I keep telling my constituents that if I cannot solve the water problem, which has been endemic for the last 20 to 30 years in Nairobi and in Langata more specifically, if I cannot solve that problem, then I failed in my mandate. But I can confirm to the people of Langata that I have the experience. I have built water systems, I've designed water systems, and I know what it takes to solve this problem decisively and conclusively.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Is it okay if I call you Nathan? because I'm like Dr.
Yeah, Nathan is fine.
Yeah.
Well, as well.
And I know we need to project our future self. I just first of all want to commend you for standing up to run, quite frankly, especially as someone who has had more of a professional background and is being driven by this really strong commitment and mission to make real change in an area where you grew up. So first of all, I really commend you on that. But can we just, we are now starting at the end. So can we talk about, your journey, how you ended up at the University of Florida, how you ended up having a focus on, water resourcing and engineering and things like that? Because that's a very specialized skill set. What was your career path like?
So I think it depends on how far you want to go. Most Kenyan students, I went through 844. I was born and raised in Langata. At some point in my teens, we moved out to Rift Valley, Eldoret. So ended up going to Sacho High School, where I graduated high school, did my KCSE, passed with very good grades, fortunately. Then after that, I had a very profound experience as a teenager, where I used to sell newspapers for extra pocket money. This was actually after I graduated. So my dad ran a pharmacy, and he would stack them for me. And every week I would come and collect. Then I take them to newspaper vendors who would then, give me 200 or 300 shillings. That would be my pocket money for that day. But on this occasion, my dad had not collected all the newspapers, so he told me to sit and wait. So as I was sitting there, the newspaper on the top, I picked that up and I started to read it. And the first page I opened was a scholarship announcement for the United World Colleges, which was a post. Yes, okay. Yes. So it was secondary. I know back in the day, we didn't have social media. We didn't have as much access to the internet. So newspaper was the primary mode by which you would get this opportunity. So it was completely by chance, sheer chance. Then I apply, and a few weeks later, I get invited for the interviews. A few weeks later, I get confirmation that I had passed the interviews. 3 months later, I was on a plane on 9/11, which is has remained a sort of a reminder for me of when I left. I found myself on a plane to the UK, a first generation scholarship student to the United World College of the Atlantic, where I spent 2.5 years. After that experience, I moved on to the University of Florida. I got a full scholarship for my undergraduate studies. When I started, I was focused on getting into medical school because, like any Kenyan, we sort of prioritize through the education system. Because of social pressure, we prioritize medical school to engineering to law and accounting, almost in that order. And well, I experimented. I took my biology classes dutifully. Initially, I had intended to do a biomedical engineering degree, then go to medical school, until I worked at a medical facility for one afternoon, and I could not deal with, the pain and the fluids, and I just at that stage decided medical school was not for me. So when I went back to college, I immediately changed my major to general engineering. So at that stage, I hadn't decided exactly what it was that I was going to do. One of the experiences I had early in my college education was I had gone to Spain for a cleanup. A ship called the Prestige had fallen off capsized off the coast of Spain, spewing with it barrels and barrels of crude oil. And we were one of the volunteer teams that had been called to go and deal with that environmental disaster. So at the back of my mind, a seed and a love for the environment had been planted. I had also grown up in Langata. Langata is by far one of the most it hosts some of the most sensitive environmental ecosystems in Nairobi. So I, at that stage, made a decision that maybe I should try out environmental, water resource engineering. So I started to dabble with coursework in those areas, and I loved it. That summer, I ended up going to work at an engineering firm, water resource engineering firm. And I remember that was my first formal job in industry, and I had a really good experience. My manager and my boss, who's still one of my mentors at that time, was very encouraging. He really pushed me. He insisted that I proceed and do a master's when I finished my undergraduate, and I did exactly that when I got back to school. How I ended up going into grad school was on the urging of my manager, who at the time told me that he thought I was qualified, or I'd benefit from having sort of more specialized coursework in water resource engineering. By this time, I was fully in the engineering department, water resource engineering department. So that progressed. I started my master's program, and at some point, I got to this stage where I was thinking through, what do I do next? Should I go back and work in industry? And then again, one of my professors came up and said, "Hey, we have this PhD opportunity. Are you interested?" Without thinking too much about what it meant. I was young. My parents were very supportive, encouraged me to stay in grad school. So I did exactly that. Then proceeded to finish my PhD in 2013. In between, I did some consulting work with firms in Nairobi around the same topic. I remember there was a World Bank project where they were trying to structure water resource water access programs. There was another program through Strathmore University where they were trying to set up a research division in the School of Public Policy, looking at water issues in Kenya. So I started to also expose myself to the Kenyan market in that way. I also had the benefit of being a Rotary Ambassadorial Scholar in South Africa. My PhD work was focused on looking at water issues and how it relates to risks around access in and around the Kruger National Park. So I spent a lot of time also in South Africa. I had the amazing fortune of going for the World Cup during that time. So I think I was already engaged with the motherland and with the continent by the time I was graduating my degree. I also was part of a group that later became a very popular show called Diaspora Live Show. It features on KTN Fridays and Saturdays. I think on Saturdays it's at prime time at around 8. So I spent a lot of time. I stayed engaged with issues at home. I was involved in some media and diaspora, Kenya diaspora events like the Kenya Diaspora conference with the embassy, the KCFA, Kenya Christian Fellowship of America. So I was very, very much involved in organizing and participating in this event. So I never lost that thread. In 2013, I graduated, and fortunately, I had a job offer in Kenya. At the time, IBM, the tech firm, was setting up a research lab in Nairobi, and they were looking for primarily for African-focused tech researchers in different areas, and one of the areas was in water resource management. So I joined that team, was there for 6.5 years, during which I did a range of work, including building water management platforms for northern counties, which was a project that was supported by various development partners. I did a lot of work with the government around the ease of doing business and government digitization, so enhancing trade competitiveness. Right. So there you used eCitizen. If you use the business registration services, you pay your taxes on iTax. If you clear your goods on the single window system hosted by Kentrade. If you pay your dues to the county either online or using mobile, I was behind building many of those systems. In fact, one of the more proud achievements I have during my career at IBM was we built out the integrated court management system. I was involved in its initial design and build out. And when COVID hit, our judiciary would have shut down had it not been for that. So the Kenyan government continued to collect revenue and continued to serve Kenyans, particularly through these systems, because of work that I was directly involved with setting up. That work was hosted under various groups, but then primarily out of the Deputy President and the President's office. It was a project by the Ministry of Industry. So I did that for about 4 years, had wild successes with that. So Kenya today is better off for the work that I did and with the support of my team. It also involved a lot of legislative work, which was a very interesting aspect of that project, and it made me start to think and understand how government actually works. You know, Kenyans are very politically mature. That's the first thing. They're also very aware of how government faces them and how government works with them. What many Kenyans don't know is the inner workings of how government systems are organized. How do we pass legislation, and how can you have input into that process? How do we fund projects, and how can we have input into that process? And one of the benefits of being in a democracy is that you have opportunities and pathways for direct input into how your society is organized. That was the original idea of democracy. And Kenya, I can frankly and conclusively say this, is one of the more mature democracies, not just in Africa, but in the world, because direct input into our legislative process does not require you into the governance process, let me put it that way, does not require you to even be an elected official. So any Kenyan today can, and this is what in fact a lot of more influential Kenyans, as well as industry bodies and companies and agencies do, they develop legislation. And I can give many examples of legislation that is developed to favor. And obviously, when you're lobbying for a piece of legislation, you're lobbying for something that favors you, or addresses a specific need. So industry bodies like the Kenya Association of Manufacturers, the Credit Reference Bureau Association, the Bankers Association, they spend a lot of time lobbying and developing this legislation and putting it in the hands of the legislature to pass and reform government priorities to favor their positions. And this is something I think Kenyans should be aware of. The second is the ability to publicly give input into legislation. I'll give you one example that's even more recent. So recently, government has been trying to deal with this issue of fuel prices. So we have something called the petroleum development levy that's levied on any amount of fuel that you buy, whether you buy kerosene or gas at the petrol. You pay some percentage of that levy to government.
Right. Now,
that is supposed to go into a fund that then is used to push on the market in the event of price shocks.
Correct.
So very recently, I went to a public hearing and I gave my input and I said, this fund has been misused. There's no transparency in how it's being dispersed. We found out that government was actually using this fund to pay for loan obligations with SGR. This is why it was not available. And when I gave that input, the last version of the law had actually taken into account that, and I did this as a concerned citizen. So the point I'm making is, any concerned Kenyan, if you know your government, if you know how legislation works, and if you're aware, and all this is, by the way, it's published and posted online, what legislations are coming up, what are the priorities, you can petition Parliament. So I think one of the things I wanted to achieve coming out of that experience, I think to give you a sense of why I'm saying this, is to make sure that I was informing and teaching Kenyans to engage at an even higher level in government, other than just the electoral process, because these are provisions that are given to us in our very, very progressive constitution. So I finished my tenure just about when COVID started in 2020. Then I ended up actually back in the US for about a year, working in an engineering design firm, which is my core expertise in water resource engineering, designing highways and roads. And I felt I needed to have more hands-on experience at that point in how you build infrastructure, because I knew I was preparing to make this dash for Parliament, and you needed to have that knowledge. Because I'll tell you this, Rose, I want to be the type of, and I'm going to be the type of leader, legislator, and representative who does work. We've forgotten what the actual role of a parliamentarian or any of our leaders is. They're the ones who are supposed to be bringing the expertise from industry, from government, from the NGO sector, and putting boots on the ground, including their own, to solve our priorities and our problems. And this has not been happening. We view leaders in a very disconnected fashion. So I felt, spend some time actually learning or relearning and building some expertise in how you build infrastructure, because it's a really important aspect for as we focus on our development priorities, like building roads and pipelines and water treatment plants, water distribution systems, schools. You need people who are on the ground to do the work, so that you both save on money, but that these projects are done correctly. So I spent 1 year working, and then I transitioned to remote work. So that's what I've been doing over the last one year, as I've been campaigning for office. So starting from mid last year, let's say sometime in October, we launched our campaign, and we've been on the ground working a grassroots effort where we've done door-to-door, very few engagements on the media and in social media, because we want to be close to where the Mwananchi lives and to understand what their specific issues are, and therefore formulate a very clear but also relevant response to those issues. At this stage, obviously, as an aspirant, we're mostly having conversations and engagements to address these issues. But I think we've put a very strong candidature forward. I'm running as a candidate of the Orange Democratic Movement, Kenya's premier, and if you ask me, only political party that actually has influence on the ground. It's very easy to market a political formation with fancy colors, but a political party is really the people, and the Orange Democratic Movement has been in the forefront of not only fighting for democracy, fighting for devolution, but also putting very clear actions and positions in place, advocating for peace and stability in the countries. This is why I chose to run as a party member. I've been a party member since 2014.
Yeah, I was going to ask you how you decided what platform to run on.
Yeah.
But that's clear now.
I'm going to, but that's my position. For the people of Langata.
Awesome. Wow, you just said so much. I have so many questions for you. I think it's really interesting how there's so many fascinating things about your story. Not only how you've had this through line of your professional experience and how it's totally relatable, to the kind of messaging and platform that you're using to run for Langata MP, and bringing your skills and experience to the table. And then also, I think honestly, there's a lot of apathy. At least, I'm one of those people who are like, oh, it's an election. Yeah. And I'm so glad you brought that up, in the fact that we can participate outside of the election process on issues. Besides the example you gave, how else would you recommend that people stay engaged and ensure that their voice is heard in topical matters that impact their daily lives?
I think it's to understand what your constitutional mandate and responsibilities as a citizen is. So we have to understand very well the mandate of our leaders in a democracy, because they are out there publicly talking about it and engaging on the issues, sometimes even using that responsibility to benefit themselves. So it's constantly about our leadership. But democracy, by definition, is government of the people, by the people. That is what democracy is supposed to be. And as I said, we're very fortunate in Kenya. We hear this statement that we have a very progressive constitution. And if we just started to operationalize it, forget about what government does, but as citizens, and start to use the instruments of power, influence, and governance that have been provided for us in that constitution so that we can create our government, we would go a long way. And I gave the example of legislation. So if it's government by the people, of the people, you should be able, and you can, that is what your representative is supposed to be there for. If you have legislative priorities that you need addressed in your constituency or in your ward, so if you want it addressed at the local level in your county assembly, or addressed at the national level, depending on the issues. So, for instance, health is a devolved function. So you just need to understand what is devolved and what is a national government. You should be able to bring together lawyers in your constituency, for example. I've done that before, and say, why don't we draft a public interest or a petition or even a legislation which addresses some of our issues. So the legislative process itself, which forms how government prioritizes its budgets, prioritizes its policy initiatives, is fully within the control of our citizens. That's Kenya for you today. What needs to happen is we need to actually start to use those instruments. That is what is not happening. But the instruments of power are there and available to us as citizens. That's the first thing. The second thing, you need to look at your rights and freedoms as a citizen. So, for example, you have the right to picket, to protest, and to hold government accountable for its various positions. So there is no reason why, if government takes an unpopular position, that you disagree with. I'll give you an example of one I know. A lobby group is currently fiercely fighting over. There's an amendment that's in Parliament about forest lands. They want to change the laws so that they can start to redistribute gazetted forest land, and changing how you actually do that gazettement process so that it makes land grabbing easy.
Find that petition. I don't know if it's worth anything, but yeah, that's something we have to protect. There was like a petition going around on change.org, and I was like, no, this one I have.
So petitions are good, but you realize when that legislation is for that process of being written and created, there's a public participation aspect there. And these groups should show up. And by law, they're required. Parliament is required to actually listen to these petitions or listen to whether these are special interest groups or individuals. I gave you an example of the Petroleum Development Fund. Citizens should be engaged at that level. And who better to do that than our really educated middle-class professionals and other groups on behalf of the public. That is your responsibility as a citizen. We're not even talking about it. That's the second way in which you can engage. Is also really important, is the electoral process. And I'll quickly describe what Kenya's electoral process looks like, because often we forget that we're a party-based democracy. We're complaining a lot about what we are, but we don't also acknowledge who we are. And the way it works for us to elect our leaders, we know we know this, but let me just describe it, very basically. We have a party-based system, bicameral, by party or bicameral, and we then have coalitions that are built, and very soon going to be having our primaries. The primary level is the most important because that's when our options are given or taken, and that's when you have most disengagement. Unfortunately for us in Kenya, the issues that are important at the local level, particularly at the ballot box, don't affect our middle class per se. So people in Langata, for example, people who live in Ngei Estate, Ngei 1, Ngei 2, people who live in Karen, they don't participate in the primary season. Lower income groups who are affected by educational grants, who are affected by this local school system, who are directly affected when there's no water in the taps. We call them grants, but they're bursaries that are distributed. Those are the people who actually care the most about our electoral system. So when you see that there's voter apathy, you have to be very specific. There's voter apathy in our middle class, mostly because they're not engaged or affected directly by local issues until it comes home, until the chickens come home to roost in one way or another. So they don't engage. But by the time you're going to the national election and you're either electing your president or your senator or your governor, those decisions are already made by the party. So we're a party-based system. So I had I had time to think about this and realize that if we wanted to have influence in our electoral process as people from the diaspora, as people who have been exposed to other systems and people who have been raised and educated either outside or in premier institutions, that is the level at which we need to engage. Not just in making sure that we get our vote out, but also on all these other instruments of power that the Constitution gives to us as citizens. We remain engaged.
What was the moment for you where you decided you were going to run? Because you touched on having some foresight.
Yeah.
What was the moment for you?
So I was never, as I described earlier, I've always been engaged in our political system or in our society. And I also understood that you don't actually need to be in government to have an impact. In fact, I have influenced, directly developed 3 or 4 pieces of legislation that currently dictate how certain aspects of our economy work. And this was before I ever made any statement about running for office. I've also been a part of another additional about 30 pieces of legislation. So in terms of legislative mandate, I understand that I don't need to be in parliament to pass legislation. That you can do as a citizen. What I realized though was the platform upon which power is projected, upon which change is made. Yes, you have civil society and civic organizations who can challenge, but the platform around which that is done is actually in government, is in those so-called halls of power or corridors of power. And I realized not only do the people of Langata, Kenyans in general, need to see a better quality of leadership presenting itself at the ballot box. I think when I realized that it was not just enough to be in the shadows, it was not enough to be working in State House on legislation that changes the way Kenya works, or the way we invest in infrastructure. It was not enough. It was not enough to work through a corporation or a consultancy to change the way we transact with government or transact as citizens. It was not enough for us to do that. You needed, or I needed, to come up forcefully and to come up in the front line to tell Kenyans that we can have a different model and idea of leadership, which is what is lacking. Because of the reasons I've outlined, the caliber of leadership in Kenya has completely deteriorated. You know, the kind of people who in the previous election won elections were people who rigged themselves in, people who have questionable academic and backgrounds. And we see this all the way to the top. So unless those who are right-minded, those who have integrity, and those who are well-educated step up and run for office, we should not complain. So I think that for me, when I got that epiphany, that I needed to be in the forefront. I think when I got that epiphany, then it was very easy to make the decision to run. Now, the decision to start running, kind of stumbled upon me because I didn't intend to actually run in 2022. It was a really interesting situation I found myself. I made a decision one afternoon to go out and just talk to an IT and say, Nathan, you keep saying that you want to run for office. Go and see what it is like. Go and see what the experience is like. And I started in one of our informal settlements in Langata, and I said, okay, I'm gonna go and just say hi and say, I've been your neighbor. I literally had lived next to that place. It's called Kuinda. It's just behind Current C Primary School. And the response was overwhelming. Within a week, I had 10, 15 invitations to speak to various community groups. That's how my run started. It was not a very obvious decision that I made or sat and decided. But once I think I had done that, then it was a foregone conclusion.
And then what followed after that? Was it like picking the platform, kind of mobilizing people on the ground and?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I one of the early experiences I had while I was living in the US is I actually worked on the Obama campaign as a field organizer in Florida through the 2008 and 2013 elections. So I already had the knowledge on how to run campaigns, how to set up grassroots efforts. All I needed to do was to find the people. And given that I'm a resident of Langata, given I've lived there for a long time, given I know various community groups, it was very easy for me to start to do that. So once I started speaking at events and engaging with various community groups at the local level, Kenyan politics is very interesting because you already have groups of people, some positive, some bad actors. You hear about a lot of there existing many people who are involved in political brokerage, or they're brokers, or
like
other groups,
kingmakers or whatever.
Yeah, and those exist even at the local level, at the local party level, and it's very aware of who's running for office where. So immediately I started to talk to community groups. I was getting phone calls from individuals who were interested to support our campaign. So, one individual called me and they said, "Oh, I can help you. Ferry voters from God knows where." And I said, "No, I'm not interested in that type of campaign." And someone else came up and told me, "I'm a community leader and I have experience doing grassroots work. I'm experienced in events planning." That individual is now my campaign manager. Then 2 or 3 days passed, and I was in Otiende, around where I grew up, and a young man was brought to me. Literally, he was kind of frog matched, as we say in Kenya, and he was told, "This guy, you cannot run in Langata or get any votes in Mugumoini without his protection." Protection meaning he knows the community really well, he knows who the main actors. He's now my head of security, and on and on and on. So I've engaged with many community groups. I've engaged in our, for one thing about Langata is that we have very many informal settlements, in addition to the larger areas of Langata which have sort of more formalized estates and things. But as we've gone through those motions, as we've built our grassroots organization, people will come up to you and tell you, we want your type of leadership. We want a better vision for our constituency and our country. We see that you have great ideas, and we see that you have the experience to implement them. We know you. I used to see you here, the shopkeepers will tell you, "Oh, now you're running, Mheshimiwa, now you umeamua, you've decided."
All right.
They take the mantle. So it's been organic, if I may put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And now we have very strong grassroots organizations. We get attacked a lot by our detractors. There's other people running for the seat, the incumbent and other players within the political party. Mostly because we have a very good handle on what is happening at the grassroots level. We have a lot of support. We've focused on the base of the pyramid, as we may put it. And I'm very optimistic as to how we're going to perform both in the primaries and eventually in the general elections.
I can't wait to see. It's definitely going to be super exciting to watch you go through that.